Mr. Hoyer, we're delighted that you're here. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, gentlemen. I adopt all the amazing accolades. Articulate.
That microphone.
Okay,
Watch that water. Watch the water.
Well, does that improve it? Or now you can hear me and perhaps you want me to move the mic away. You know, I love to tell the story. Paul Sarbanes was speaking to a group of about 400 people, and a guy in the back of the room raised his hand and said, "Senator, I can't hear you." Immediately, a guy in the front row said, "I can, and I'll trade places with you." So, anytime you want me to shift the mic, Doctor, I'll do it.
Mr. Hoyer, do you remember the story about President Lyndon Johnson, who was in a meeting and Bill Moyer was giving the prayer? This is as reported. I was not there. And Bill Moyer was praying, and the president said, "Speak up, I can't hear you." Bill said, "Mr. President, I wasn't speaking to you."
I won't go into what he thought, meaning the president. Hanukkah just came to a close. We are 4 days from Christmas, and we are 9 days from the end of the year. And much of the work that this Congress needs to do is undone. And so we find ourselves some 24, a little bit 36 hours from shutting down our government. And until late last night, perhaps early this morning, we on our side had no idea of exactly what was going to be proposed. We're now here at the Rules Committee at 8 a.m. in the morning to decide what we're going to do this afternoon. And we have not been included in the discussions. And that's unfortunate. Clearly, we need to address many issues. Leader Pelosi has spoken of them. We have not passed a single appropriation bill to the President of the United States. We're not in control of anything. Not a single appropriation bill has gone to the President of the United States. Not one. Yes, we passed some through the House. Matter of fact, all of them through the House. But the Republican leader did not put a single one of them on the Senate floor. So we find ourselves not only with no appropriation bills funded, but we also find ourselves with no agreement on the levels of spending that we will address, the caps. We've been urging to come to an agreement, and we had an agreement under Ryan Murray 4 years in a row, which said we would have parity. Parity seems pretty simple. 2 plus 2, 2 and 2. Or whatever number is chosen is parity. But we've been unable to reach an agreement. So we find ourselves here with not only no appropriation bills done, but no guidance to the Appropriation Committee at what level they should fund their legislation. To make an agreement. So we find ourselves again with less than 48 hours left to go. We voted for a CR overwhelmingly. It was a no-drama CR in the middle of September, which allowed us to have 90 days in which to resolve the issues that confronted us. And frankly, the only thing was considered was a tax bill, which we think is a disaster. You think is a real spur to the economy. We have a difference of opinion on that. But that's what we spent our time on. We did not resolve any of the substantive issues in that 90 days. And so we had another CR 2 weeks ago. We didn't vote for it because we thought, correctly, the only thing that was going to be paid attention to was the tax bill. And none of the issues for which you voted for a CR, you got 90 of your people back, and because they thought it was just 2 weeks, that it wouldn't really damage defense as much as they thought it would in September when they voted against it. 90 of your colleagues. CR would not have passed. That 90 days, we would have had a crisis in September. Had Democrats not stepped up to the bar and said, okay, let's work together, let's get these issues resolved. We didn't do that. You spent all your time on your tax bill. The previous 10 months, you spent most of your time on repealing the Affordable Care Act and taking health care away from millions of people. So we have some very significant policy differences, but we need to come to agreement. And we have no confidence that any extension is going to get us to further agreement. Mr. Cole, Ms. Pelosi, and I, we served on the Appropriations Committee. We came to agreements. But we have come to no agreements. And once again, we find ourselves the can down the road. We're not going to tell defense what money they'll have for the next 9 months, 8 months. We're not going to tell the Department of Energy or the Labor, Health, Human Services, Department of State, Department of Commerce, other departments of governments and agencies. We're not going to tell them how they can plan for the next 9 months. Any business that did that would go bankrupt in a short period of time. It is a terrible way to run the government of the United States or any other enterprise. And so we find ourselves here no closer to agreement, frankly, than we have been in the first 11 months. And I have had discussions with your majority leader, our majority leader, with whom I deal in a constructive way on many issues. And I told him that there were a number of issues that we felt were necessary in order for us to participate in helping the majority party, which has extraordinary difficulty running this government. You're a deeply divided party. We saw that last night on the floor of the House of Representatives. I don't know whether you've resolved those differences in the last 24 hours or not. But it is clear that without our participation in September, you would not have passed a CR. Government would have shut down. But we hoped during that time we would have had some ability to work together. I told the majority leader as long ago as August that the DREAM Act had to be resolved. The President took an action in September that your Speaker urged him not to do. As a result, it put at risk some 800,000, really 1.6 million, young people who've grown up in America, who believe America is their country and gone to elementary school, junior high school, and high school, have worked in jobs, have gone to school, have served in our military. And they're twisting in the wind. Rush Limbaugh said, we're not going to send those kids home. We've said, we're not going to send those kids home. The President of the United States says he loves the Dreamers. There is no excuse for us not having put a bill on the floor to resolve this issue. Over 300 members of the Congress of the United States will vote on that when you put it on the floor. So the only reason it's not on the floor is because the leadership has refused to do so. That was very important to us. And I've talked to the leader over and over again. I've raised it in colloquy over and over and over again. Opioids, which the leader has spoken of. A choice, we should have resolved that bill. Perkins Loan Program, we should have resolved that issue. Community health centers, we should have resolved that issue. Medicare extenders, we should have resolved that issue. Fire grants, we should have resolved that issue. And yes, the Dreamers as well. But here we find ourselves less than 48 hours before the end of the year, or before the end of the current CR. And nothing has been resolved. No discussions have led to resolution of these issues. Everybody's reading their phones. Perhaps what I'm saying is not relevant. But on our side, we feel it's relevant. And you have needed our votes on almost every fiscal issue that has passed this House. Because so many of your members, you have over 218, you could pass anything on your own. And you pass the tax bill on your own. So when you want to pass things on your own, you create a consensus to do so. But on almost every fiscal issue, on one fiscal issue that John Boehner, Mr. McCarthy, and Mr. Scalise asked you to vote on, actually, I guess it was Mr. Boehner, Mr. Cantor, and Mr. McCarthy. You got 84 votes to join the three of them in order to keep the government open. And over 125 of your members voted no, not to keep the government open. And the director of OMB voted not to open up the government when you shut it down for 16 days. So I come before the committee saying, if you're going to offer a rule that is going to make in order some amendments or some alternatives, if you expect our help, you ought to put in things that we think are important, and we'll have a significant number of Republicans voting with us, including, I presume, many of you. I don't know that. So I come before you saying, you have 36 hours to keep the government open. We don't have the votes to keep the government open. We don't have the votes to shut it down. And the American people have given you the responsibility to do that. And if you've got the votes, you don't have to talk to us. But if you don't have the votes, we really need to come together in a bipartisan way to be the responsible stewards of this government. So I would urge you to include initially an amendment which says that those dreamers will no longer be twisting in the wind, and that we will give them the assurances that the President of the United States says he will sign to give them. This is not a question where the President of the United States said, I'm going to veto that bill. He said he would sign the bill. He said it to Leader Pelosi and Leader Schumer, and he said it to the world. So we think that needs to be in there. We think we need to deal with the VA. We think we need to deal with FISA. But we need to deal with them in a constructive, bipartisan way. And if we don't look to us for help, because we're not included. We're shut out. As the tax bill. No hearings, no witnesses, and a conference that was a fraud. The only thing Democrats did in that tax conference was able to make a statement. No amendments, no suggestions. That's not regular order. But much more than that, it's not fair. It's not what the American people expect of us. So I come to you asking for certainly that amendment. I ask as well, because I understand you're considering the supplemental, your tax bill and the supplemental bill undermines Puerto Rico. 3.5 million, 3.6 million Americans, as well as the Virgin Islands. They still have 35% of people in Puerto Rico without electricity. If 35% of the people in Houston were without electricity, it would be a national scandal. You would all be outraged. You would not allow it to happen. And the tax bill treats Puerto Rico as a foreign government. They are Americans, fully a part of the United States of America. And if they want to go to Florida or any place else, they come. Why? Because they're Americans. So we believe the supplemental also needs to be revised in a way that treats Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands as full partners of the United States of America, not as foreign governments. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity. I would ask that I submit a dear colleague, which has been sent by Tim Walz to colleagues, expressing his deep concern about the extension of the VA Choice Act, which he thinks will undermine the VA because it's not a full bill dealing with the needs of the VA and veterans' access to health care, doctors, beds, etc. I would ask, Mr. Chairman, that that be included in the record at this time. And last, in closing, I would say I really do believe we can do some very good work if we do it in a bipartisan way. And will I have to give something? Yes. Will you have to give something? Yes. That's the democratic process. We are not pursuing that. And that's why we find ourselves in this conundrum 36 hours before the government's going to shut down. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, anything the gentleman brought right will be entered in the record. And I appreciate the gentleman for his not only comments, but for his time this morning to come before the Rules Committee